The last time I saw Julian Vane, I was running out of his penthouse in the middle of a thunderstorm, my heart shattered into a million jagged pieces. He was the man who had everything: power, beauty, and a soul made of ice. I was just the girl who had been hired to catalog his family's private library. For one summer the Ice King had thawed, and I had been foolish enough to believe his whispers in the dark. But then his fiancée returned from Europe, and Julian reminded me exactly where I stood in his world. I was a temporary distraction. I didn't tell him I was pregnant. I didn't want his money, and I certainly didn't want my child to be raised in a house where love was a transaction. I disappeared. I changed my name, moved to a quiet town in Maine, and built a life out of flour, sugar, and the scent of sea salt. For 4 years I was just Sophie, the woman who ran the bakery. And Leo was just my son, the boy with Julian's piercing blue eyes and that same stubborn set to his jaw. The piece ended on a Tuesday. The diner door chimed and I didn't even look up. "We're out of the blueberry scones, I'm afraid," I said, wiping my hands on my apron. "I didn't come for the scones, Sophie. Or should I say, Elena?" The voice hit me like a physical blow. It was deeper than I remembered, colder and laced with a dangerous vibration. I looked up and the world stopped. Julian Vane was standing in my bakery. He looked out of place in the rustic room, his $1,000 suit a sharp contrast to the peeling paint. He looked at me with a hunger that made my knees weak, but there was something else there, a fury that made the air feel thin. "Julian," I breathed, my hand instinctively going to the locket at my neck. "How did you find me?" "You forgot that I own the bank that holds your mortgage, Elena," he said, stepping closer until I could smell the sandalwood and rain on his skin. "I've been watching you for 3 months, waiting for you to come back to me on your own. But then I saw him." He leaned over the counter, his eyes burning. "I saw the boy, Elena. He was playing in the park. He has my eyes. He has my name. Why is he in Maine instead of in the Vane estate?" Before I could answer, the bell on the back door jingled. "Mama, look what I found." Leo came running into the shop, his face smudged with dirt, holding a bright yellow leaf. He skidded to a halt when he saw the stranger standing at the counter. The silence in the bakery was deafening. Julian stared at Leo, his breathing suddenly ragged. It was like looking into a mirror across time. The Ice King didn't just thaw, he crumbled. He dropped to one knee, his hand trembling as he reached toward the boy. "Leo," I said, my voice shaking. "Go to the back and finish your drawing, okay?" Leo looked at Julian with a curious, fearless tilt of his head. "Are you a king?" he asked. "You look like the man in my book." Julian's throat worked as he swallowed hard. "No, Leo," he whispered, his eyes never leaving the boy's face. "I'm just a man who's been lost for a very long time." As soon as Leo was gone, Julian stood up, his face hardening back into a mask of iron. "Pack your things," he commanded. "The car is outside. You and the boy are coming back to New York. I am not a catalog item, Julian. You can't just claim us." I shouted, the 4 years of suppressed anger finally boiling over. "You chose your legacy. You chose your fiancé. We are not part of your deal." "There is no fiancé," he hissed, grabbing my waist and pulling me flush against him. "I broke that off the day after you left. I spent 4 years scouring the globe for you. I thought you were dead. I thought I had lost the only thing that ever made me feel human." He tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, his touch possessive and electric. "You can hate me, Elena. You can fight me. But that boy is a Vane. And I will burn this entire state to the ground before I let you take him from me again." The drive back to the city was a silent war. We were trapped in the back of his armored SUV. Me, Julian, and Leo, who was happily watching cartoons on a tablet Julian had happened to have ready. I watched Julian out of the corner of my eye. He was staring at Leo with a mixture of terror and adoration. When we reached the penthouse, it wasn't the cold, sterile place I remembered. One entire wing had been converted into a child's paradise. Toys, books, a bed shaped like a ship. Julian had known. He had prepared for this for months. "You've been planning this," I said, standing in the middle of the nursery. "The mortgage, the bakery, the toys. You were trapping us." "I was protecting you," Julian countered, stepping into the room. The board of directors is looking for a reason to oust me. If they knew I had an heir living in a bakery in Maine, they would have used him against me. He's safe. Here you are both safe. He walked over to me, his presence overwhelming the room. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, Elena. I know I was a coward 4 years ago. But I have spent every second since then regretting it. He reached out, his hand cupping my cheek. I don't want a secret baby. I want a family. I want the world to know that the Ice King has a heart, and it's currently standing in this room. And if I still want to leave? I whispered, though I already knew the answer. Julian leaned down, his lips brushing mine in a kiss that tasted of years of longing and a dark, unyielding promise. Then I'll just have to make you fall in love with me all over again. And this time, Sophie, I'm not letting you go until the library is finished. And since I'm buying 10,000 more books tomorrow, that's going to take a very, very long time. The penthouse wasn't just a home, it was a high-frequency fortress. Julian had replaced every window with reinforced ballistic glass and tripled the security detail. To the world he was still the untouchable CEO of Vane Global, but inside these walls I saw the cracks. He spent his nights sitting in the dark of the nursery watching Leo sleep, his silhouette a mix of fierce protection and haunting regret. He's having nightmares, I whispered, finding Julian by Leo's bed at 3 a.m. I know, Julian replied, his voice a low rasp. He dreams of the ocean back in Maine. He feels the cage, Elena. Just like you do. He stood up, the moonlight catching the sharp lines of his face. He walked toward me, his presence a physical weight in the small room. But the vultures are circling. My uncle Silas has found out about the boy. He's calling for a blood test and a seat on the board. He thinks Leo is a fabrication, a play for power. Then give it to him, I snapped, stepping into his space. Give him the test. Let us go back to our life. Julian grabbed my waist, pulling me flush against his chest. His heart was beating with a frantic, wild energy. You don't understand. Silas doesn't want the truth, he wants the throne. If the test is positive, Leo becomes a target. If it's negative, I'm ruined. Either way, you and the boy are the collateral. He leaned down, his lips grazing my forehead. I'm not keeping you here to punish you. I'm keeping you here because I am the only monster big enough to keep the others away. To silence the rumors, Julian orchestrated a debut. It was a masquerade gala, a sea of silk and velvet masks designed to hide the predators. I was draped in a gown of midnight blue, the Vane diamonds heavy around my neck, a collar of ice and light. Julian held Leo in his arms, the boy looking like a miniature prince in a tiny tuxedo. The room went silent as we descended the grand staircase. Silas Vane, a man with eyes like a dead shark, stepped forward, a champagne glass in his hand. A charming fairy tale, Julian, Silas sneered, his gaze lingering on Leo. But we all know how stories end. Usually in tragedy. This isn't a story, Silas. It's a legacy, Julian replied, his voice like a blade being drawn. But the night took a dark turn. During the toast, a tray of glasses was shattered, creating a diversion. In the chaos, a man in a black mask lunged for Leo. I screamed, but before the stranger could reach my son, Julian moved. He didn't look like a CEO then, he looked like a predator. He intercepted the man, his movements a blur of calculated violence, pinning him against a marble pillar while the guests gasped in horror. Get them out of here. Julian roared to his security. As I ran with Leo toward the private elevator, I looked back. Julian wasn't looking at the attacker. He was looking at me, his eyes dilated with a terrifying, possessive rage. He hadn't just saved Leo. He had claimed the right to be the only danger in our lives. The fallout of the gala was immediate. Julian went into a blackout mode. No one in, no one out. He moved us to the north wing, a section of the penthouse I had never seen. It was filled with monitors, maps, and a wall of photographs that made my blood run cold. It wasn't just photos of the bakery. There were photos of Leo at the park. Photos of me at the grocery store. Photos dating back to the very week I left New York 4 years ago. You never lost me, I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. You didn't find us last month. You've been watching us the entire time. Julian stepped out of the shadows, his tie loosened, his eyes dark with a raw, unapologetic obsession. I couldn't let you go, Elena. I let you live that simple life because I thought it would make you happy. I paid your mortgage anonymously. I scared away the men who tried to ask you on dates. I was your guardian angel. You were a ghost. I shouted, hitting his chest. You watched me struggle. You watched me raise a baby alone while you sat in your ivory tower playing God. He grabbed my hands, pinning them to the wall above my head. He was shaking. I stayed away because I knew the moment I touched you I wouldn't be able to stop. I knew I would bring the darkness of my world down on your head. And I was right. Look at what happened at the gala. He pressed his body into mine, his voice a broken sob. I am a man who can only love through a lens, Elena. Because the real me is too dangerous for you to hold. The climax came on a night of freezing rain. Silas had made his move, freezing Julian's assets and sending a tactical team to retrieve the heir. The penthouse was under siege. The lights flickered and died, leaving us in the red glow of the emergency system. Take the service lift, Julian commanded, handing me a heavy briefcase and a set of keys. There is a helicopter on the roof of the building across the street. My pilot is waiting. Go to Switzerland. Don't look back. What about you? I asked, clutching Leo to my chest. I'm going to end the vein cycle, Julian said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, tattered red ribbon, the one I had lost in the library the night we first met. He pressed it into my hand. I've spent 4 years watching you live. Now I want you to actually be free. Even if that means you're free from me. He kissed me then, a desperate bruising kiss that tasted of salt and decades of hidden longing. He shoved us into the lift and hit the button. As the doors closed, I saw Julian turn toward the main entrance, pulling a heavy iron bar from the wall, facing the men coming for his crown. But I didn't go to the roof. When the lift hit the garage, I saw the black SUVs. I saw Silas waiting. I realized that if I left, Julian would die for a legacy I didn't want. I walked out into the rain, holding Leo, and walked straight toward Silas. You want the company? I shouted over the thunder. Take it. All of it. Julian has already signed the transfer papers in that briefcase. But you leave us alone. You leave the Ice King in his tower and you never speak the name Vane again. The trade was made. Silas got the gold, we got the life. 1 year later, the bakery in Maine is open again. But there's a new employee. He's a man who doesn't know much about flour, but he's very good at guarding the door. Julian Vane is no longer a billionaire. He is just a man who sits on the porch, watching his son play in the sand, his eyes finally clear of the ice. He still watches me, but it's no longer through a camera. It's from across the kitchen, his hand finding mine in the floury mess of a Tuesday morning. The secret is out, the cage is gone, and the king has finally found his home. The flour on the counter was the only thing white in Julian's life now. No more silk shirts, no more bleached bone boardrooms. It was 5 a.m. in Oak Haven, Maine, and the man who once moved markets with a whisper was currently struggling with a sourdough starter. Julian stood in the back of the bakery, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing the faint scars on his forearms from the night at the penthouse. He looked at the dough as if it were a hostile takeover. It's too sticky, Elena, he muttered, his brow furrowed in that intense analytical way he used to study merger contracts. The hydration levels are suboptimal. I've calculated the humidity of the room, and the math doesn't add up. I leaned against the doorframe, a mug of coffee in my hands, watching the Ice King battle a pile of yeast. Julian, it's bread, not a hedge fund. You have to feel it. Stop thinking. He looked up, and for a second that old possessive spark flared in his eyes. He walked toward me, leaving a trail of white footprints on the rustic wooden floor. He didn't stop until he had me pinned against the frame, his hands, covered in flour, resting on the wood beside my head. I don't know how to just feel things, Elena, he whispered, his voice a low, gravelly vibration. I've spent 30 years controlling every variable. Now, my entire world depends on the rise of a loaf of bread and the mood of a 4-year-old boy. And? I asked, reaching up to brush a smudge of flour off his cheek. Is it enough? Julian leaned down, his forehead resting against mine. The The scent of sandalwood had been replaced by the smell of warm yeast and sea air, but the intensity of his gaze hadn't changed. "It's terrifying," he admitted. "Every time I walk to the mailbox and don't see a security detail, my heart stops. Every time Leo runs toward the docks, I want to build a wall around the entire coast." He sighed, his breath warm against my skin. "But then I see you. I see you sleeping without one hand on the alarm. I see Leo laughing at a seagull instead of a monitor. And I realize that I wasn't protecting you back then. I was just hiding from the fact that I didn't know how to be a man without a throne." The bell above the front door chimed. Our first customer. Julian stiffened, his muscles coiling with that old protective instinct. He peered through the window of the kitchen door. It was just Mrs. Higgins, the local librarian. Julian relaxed, but only slightly. He took the apron off the hook and tied it around his waist. "I'll handle the front," he said. "Julian, you're still a bit intimidating for the locals," I cautioned. "I've been practicing my approachable face," he said seriously. I watched through the glass as he walked to the counter. He stood perfectly straight, his presence still commanding the entire room. Mrs. Higgins looked up at the 6 feet 3 inches man with the piercing blue eyes and the aura of a silent assassin. "I'd like a croissant, dear," she chirped. Julian stared at her for a long beat, his face a mask of stone. Then he slowly, painfully, cracked a smile. It was a bit stiff, a bit rusty, but it was real. "An excellent choice, madam. Our current inventory is fresh, though the crust tension is slightly higher than yesterday's batch." Mrs. Higgins blinked. "Oh. Thank you, young man." When he came back into the kitchen, I was doubled over laughing. "Crust tension? Really, Julian?" He grabbed me by the waist, pulling me into a dusting of flour. "She needed to know the quality metrics, Elena. Consistency is the hallmark of a successful enterprise." He pulled me closer, his eyes darkening as they dropped to my lips. The playfulness vanished, replaced by that raw, unyielding devotion that had once built a gilded cage but now built a life. "I may not have the satellites anymore," he murmured, his thumb tracing my lower lip. "But I'm still watching you. Only now I don't need a lens to see that I finally have everything I ever wanted." He kissed me then, deep and slow, as the sun began to rise over the Atlantic. The billionaire was gone, the secret was told, and the Ice King had finally found a kingdom worth ruling. A small bakery, a messy kitchen, and a love that didn't need a contract to be true.